I walked into my sister's engagement party alone, and her fiancé's family immediately started whispering about the sad single sister who couldn't find a date. But then Staff Sergeant David Martinez, my sister's fiancé, looked up from across the room and his face went white. He dropped his beer, stood at attention, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Ma'am, General Thompson, I didn't know you were Katie's sister." The entire room fell silent, as my sister's in-laws realized, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That the woman they'd been mocking as a lonely failure was actually a 2-star general who had commanded thousands of Marines in combat. My name is Colonel Rebecca Thompson, and for the past 18 months, I've served as a 2-star general in the United States Marine Corps. But to my sister's future in-laws, I'm just Rebecca, the unmarried older sister who works somewhere in the military and apparently can't manage to find a husband or live a normal life. I hadn't been home to San Diego in 3 months, but my younger sister Katie's engagement party was one of those family obligations that couldn't be missed. The celebration was being held at the Martinez family's sprawling ranch-style home in Carlsbad, complete with a perfectly manicured backyard, string lights, and enough extended family to fill a small auditorium. I arrived alone, as I always did, wearing a simple black dress that I'd grabbed from my limited civilian wardrobe. The Martinez family was already in full celebration mode. David's mother, Maria, was directing the catering like a commanding officer. His father, Roberto, was holding court by the barbecue grill, and various cousins, aunts, and uncles were scattered throughout the backyard sharing stories and laughter. Katie found me first, practically glowing with happiness in her engagement dress. "Becca, you made it," she squealed, pulling me into a hug. "I was worried you wouldn't be able to get leave." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, genuinely happy to see her so radiant. At 26, Katie had found exactly what she'd always wanted: a loving partner, a traditional family life, and the promise of white picket fences and Sunday dinners. "Come on, let me introduce you to everyone," she said, leading me toward the main gathering. "David's family is so excited to meet you." The introductions began with the usual pleasantries, but I could immediately sense the undercurrent of judgment. Maria Martinez looked me up and down with the critical eye of a woman who measured success by marital status and grandchildren. Roberto gave me a polite handshake while his eyes clearly wondered what was wrong with me that I'd arrived alone. "So, Rebecca," Maria began, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced interest, "Katie tells us you're in the military. That must be interesting work for a woman." "It has its challenges," I replied diplomatically. "And you're not married?" This came from David's aunt Carmen, who had apparently appointed herself as the family's personal life investigator. "Katie mentioned you've been focused on your career. That's admirable, I suppose." The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes, each comment carefully wrapped in politeness but clearly designed to highlight my apparent shortcomings. I wasn't married, I didn't have children, I lived alone. I worked in what they obviously considered a man's profession. To them, I was the cautionary tale, the woman who had prioritized career over family and ended up alone. "It's just so sad," I overheard Maria saying to a group of relatives later. "Katie's sister seems like such a nice girl, but she's getting older and still single." Sometimes women focus so much on work that they forget what really matters. Roberto nodded sagely. "Military life is tough on women, probably scared off all the good men. Who wants to compete with that kind of intensity?" The comments stung more than they should have, but I'd learned long ago to maintain my composure under fire. What they didn't know was that my career focus had taken me through 3 combat deployments, earned me a Bronze Star, and put me in command of thousands of Marines. The intensity they mocked had kept soldiers alive and missions successful. But explaining that would require revealing an identity I'd worked hard to keep separate from my family life. To them, I was just Katie's older sister who worked somewhere in the military and couldn't seem to figure out how to be a proper woman. David approached me during a lull in the conversation, his expression apologetic. "General, Rebecca, I'm sorry about my family. They don't understand military life." I looked at him sharply, but he'd already caught himself and moved away, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined the slip. What the Martinez family didn't know was that 3 days earlier, I had been in a classified briefing at the Pentagon, coordinating a multinational counterterrorism operation that would span 4 countries and involve over 12,000 personnel. While they assumed I was filing paperwork at some local military base, I was actually commanding one of the most complex joint operations in recent Marine Corps history. The military job they pitied me for was actually the second highest ranking position a Marine could achieve. My days began at 0430 with intelligence briefings that could reshape American foreign policy. I regularly advised the Secretary of Defense, testified before Congress on military readiness, and made decisions that affected the lives of Marines stationed across the globe. When they assumed I was single because I scared men away, the truth was that I'd made a conscious choice to prioritize service over personal relationships. I'd turned down a marriage proposal from a fellow officer because it would have required one of us to leave our command positions. The intensity they mocked had been forged in the crucible of combat leadership in Afghanistan and Iraq. The simple black dress I wore wasn't from lack of fashion sense. It was because I'd learned that expensive clothing was impractical when you might need to deploy to a war zone with 12 hours' notice. My modest lifestyle wasn't from lack of income. It was from spending most of my time in officers' quarters, forward operating bases, and temporary duty stations around the world. While Katie had been planning her wedding and building a civilian life, I had been leading Marines through some of the most dangerous missions in modern warfare. The Bronze Star they'd never heard about was earned during a firefight in Helmand Province, where I'd personally led a rescue operation that saved 14 trapped Marines. The Purple Heart collecting dust in my footlocker came from the IED that had nearly killed me during my second deployment. My career focus that they criticized had actually saved lives. When Maria Martinez worried about my lack of children, she had no idea that first considered every Marine under my command to be my responsibility, that I'd held dying soldiers in my arms and promised their mothers I'd bring them home. The maternal instinct she thought I was missing had been redirected into keeping thousands of young Americans alive in combat zones. The truth was that I'd sacrificed everything they valued: marriage, children, a traditional domestic life, for something they couldn't understand. Every missed family gathering, every declined social invitation, every relationship that couldn't survive my deployment schedule had been in service of something larger than myself. Tonight, listening to them dissect my apparent failures as a woman, I felt the familiar weight of living 2 lives. In one world, I was General Rebecca Thompson, respected leader of Marines, decorated combat veteran, trusted advisor to the highest levels of government. In the other, I was just Katie's sad sister who couldn't figure out how to be happy. The irony was suffocating. They measured success by engagement rings and baby announcements, while I measured it by Marines who came home alive, by missions accomplished, by threats neutralized before they could reach American soil. They saw my single status as evidence of personal failure, when it was actually evidence of personal sacrifice for national service. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from my aide-de-camp about tomorrow's briefing with the Joint Chiefs. In less than 18 hours, I would be discussing troop movements and strategic priorities with the highest levels of military leadership. But tonight, I was just the family disappointment who couldn't manage to find a date to her sister's engagement party. The disconnect between my 2 worlds had never felt more painful than it did in that moment, surrounded by people who loved Katie but saw me as everything a successful woman shouldn't be. As the evening progressed and the Martinez family continued their subtle criticisms about my single status, my secure phone vibrated with the distinctive pattern that meant national security emergency. I discreetly checked the encrypted message under the table. Flash priority: American hostages captured in Yemen. Immediate extraction required. Joint Chiefs convening 0200 hours. My blood ran cold. This was the scenario every military commander dreaded. American civilians captured by hostile forces in a region where conventional rescue operations were nearly impossible. The message contained preliminary intelligence that suggested the hostages were being held by a terrorist cell that had been on our watch list for months. I excused myself to the bathroom, my hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. In the privacy of the guest bathroom, I accessed the full briefing on my secure device. 4 American aid workers had been taken from a humanitarian convoy outside Sana'a. The terrorists were demanding the release of high-value detainees in exchange for the hostages' lives, And intelligence suggested we had less than 48 hours before they would be moved to a location where rescue would be impossible. This was exactly the kind of crisis that defined general officers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Moments when split-second decisions could mean the difference between bringing Americans home alive or watching them become casualties of international terrorism. The operation would require precision coordination between multiple special operations units, real-time intelligence gathering, and diplomatic negotiations with Yemeni government officials. I called my aide-de-camp, who was already coordinating with Central Command. "General Thompson," he said, his voice tight with controlled urgency, "we have preliminary extraction plans being developed by JSOC. They're requesting your authorization for immediate deployment of assets to the region." The timing was catastrophic. While the Martinez family celebrated Katie's engagement, I was about to authorize one of the most dangerous hostage rescue operations in recent memory. The irony was bitter. They pitied my lack of a traditional family life while I prepared to risk everything to bring someone else's family members home. "What's our timeline for mission authorization?" I asked quietly. "Secretary of Defense wants preliminary approval within 6 hours. If we're going to move, it has to be fast. The longer we wait, the more likely they'll move the hostages beyond our reach." This wasn't just about military strategy anymore. 4 Americans were depending on decisions I would make in the next few hours. Their families were probably getting the worst phone calls of their lives right now, and I would be responsible for either bringing their loved ones home or explaining why the rescue attempt failed. I returned to the party, where Maria Martinez was regaling a group of relatives with stories about her daughters-in-law and their children. The conversation felt surreal. They were discussing baby showers and birthday parties while I was mentally calculating extraction routes and casualty probabilities. "Rebecca, you look distracted," Katie observed, approaching with David and a group of his Marine buddies. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I replied, calculating how quickly I could leave without arousing suspicion. In less than 4 hours, I would need to be in a secure facility coordinating with special operations commanders, who would be risking their lives on my orders. David was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. As a staff sergeant, he would certainly understand the weight of military responsibility, but he had no idea that the woman standing next to him was about to authorize a mission that would either save 4 American lives or potentially start an international incident. My phone buzzed again with updates from the intelligence community. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and every minute of delay reduced our chances of a successful rescue. The celebration that was supposed to honor Katie's engagement was about to become the night my family discovered that their lonely failure was actually about to command one of the most dangerous hostage rescue operations in recent American military history. I was calculating how to gracefully exit the party when David approached me directly, his expression suddenly serious. He had been drinking with his Marine buddies, but now his demeanor shifted to something I recognized, the careful attention of a soldier who had just noticed something important. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something. Your last name is Thompson, right?" My heart stopped. I had been careful all evening to avoid any direct military conversation with David. Knowing that any active-duty Marine would eventually make connections I preferred to keep private. But now, with my family watching our conversation and his relatives nearby, there was no escape. "Yes," I replied simply, hoping he wouldn't pursue the line of questioning. David's eyes narrowed slightly, studying my face with the careful attention that Marines bring to identifying chain of command. I watched as recognition dawned, his expression shifting from casual interest to complete shock. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, then immediately caught himself. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "I mean, holy hell, you're General Thompson." The words weren't loud, but in the relative quiet of the backyard conversation, they carried. Several of his Marine buddies looked up from their beers, their faces showing the same progression of confusion, recognition, and awe that was playing across David's features. "What did you just say?" Katie asked, moving closer to us with a confused smile. "David, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." David seemed to realize the magnitude of what he'd just discovered. He looked at me, then at Katie, then back at me. When he spoke again, his voice carried the unmistakable tone of a Marine addressing a superior officer. "Ma'am, General Thompson, I had no idea you were Katie's sister." The effect was immediate and electric. The group of Marines nearby fell silent, their casual conversation dying mid-sentence. Maria Martinez, who had been talking to her sister about wedding planning, turned to look at us with curiosity. Roberto stopped mid-story about his real estate business. "General?" Katie repeated, her voice carrying confusion and something that might have been dawning realization. "David, what are you talking about?" One of David's Marine friends, a corporal named Johnson, had gone completely pale. He set down his beer and took a step back, his posture unconsciously straightening. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," he said quietly. "Are you telling me that's General Rebecca Thompson? The General Thompson?" The moment I'd been dreading for years was happening in the worst possible circumstances. Not only was my cover blown, but it was happening while I was trying to manage a national security crisis that required my immediate attention. "Yes," I said simply, my voice carrying the authority that came naturally after years of command. "I'm General Thompson." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria Martinez's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Roberto's mouth fell open in complete bewilderment. Katie looked like she was trying to solve a complex equation in her head. David, despite his shock, maintained his military bearing. "Ma'am, I apologize for the informal address. I had no idea that Katie's sister was— your reputation in the Corps is legendary." "Legendary?" Maria whispered, as if saying it louder would make it less true. "Rebecca, what is he talking about?" Corporal Johnson found his voice first. "Ma'am, you led the operation that rescued those Marines in Fallujah. And the counterinsurgency campaign in Helmand Province. Every Marine knows your name." The group of relatives who had been listening to jokes about my inability to find a husband now stared at me with expressions ranging from awe to complete bewilderment. The woman they'd been pitying for her lonely life was actually one of the most decorated and respected officers in the United States Marine Corps. "General," Roberto said faintly. "You mean like an actual general? With stars?" "2 stars," David confirmed, his voice carrying the respect that Marines reserve for flag officers. "Ma'am, if I may ask, what brings you to a family gathering? Shouldn't you be somewhere more important?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with another urgent message about the hostage situation. The irony was overwhelming. Here I was, finally revealed as a general, while simultaneously managing what could become an international incident. 20 minutes later, I found myself in an unprecedented situation, conducting an emergency Joint Chiefs briefing from the Martinez family's home office, while my sister's future in-laws watched in stunned silence. David had cleared the room and offered his father's study for privacy, while Katie stood guard outside to ensure we weren't interrupted. "General Thompson," came the voice of Admiral Peterson through the encrypted video link, "we now have confirmation that the hostages are being held in a compound 12 kilometers outside Sana'a. Intelligence suggests they'll be moved to a more secure location within 18 hours. The Martinez family sat around the room like observers at a military operation, watching me transform from their disappointing future daughter-in-law into the person who would authorize one of the most dangerous rescue missions in recent memory." David's mouth was still slightly open, processing that his fiancé's sister was receiving real-time briefings on international hostage situations. "What's our extraction timeline?" I asked, pulling up classified documents on my secure tablet while simultaneously coordinating with Central Command. "JSOC has assets pre-positioned in Djibouti," Colonel Martinez from Special Operations Command reported through the speaker. "We can have boots on the ground within 6 hours if you authorize immediate deployment. But General, the risk assessment is significant. This isn't a clean extraction scenario." Maria Martinez had gone completely pale. "Rebecca, are you telling me you're about to send soldiers into combat? People could die?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," I replied, authorizing deployment orders on my tablet. 4 Americans are being held by terrorists, and I'm responsible for bringing them home alive. Admiral Peterson's voice came through the speaker again. "General, we need your decision on rules of engagement. The compound is in a populated area, and civilian casualties could create an international incident." The weight of the decision hit me as I looked around the room at my family. This wasn't just about military tactics. It was about authorizing a mission that could either save 4 American lives or potentially escalate into a broader conflict in the region. Authorized for minimal force engagement, I said without hesitation. Priority is hostage extraction with 0 civilian casualties. If the mission parameters change, our teams extract immediately. David finally found his voice. Ma'am, you're coordinating this entire operation from my parents' house? You have that level of authority? I have command authority over joint special operations when American lives are at stake, I replied, coordinating with the State Department about diplomatic protocols. This is what general officers do, Staff Sergeant Martinez. Corporal Johnson, who had been listening in respectful silence, spoke up. Ma'am, if I may ask, how many operations like this have you commanded? This will be my 12th hostage rescue authorization, I said. Previous operations have had a 91% success rate for hostage recovery with minimal friendly casualties. Roberta was staring at me with something approaching awe. Rebecca, you're saying you've done this 11 times before? You've sent Marines into combat situations? I've sent Marines, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Air Force Special Operations personnel into combat when American lives were at stake, I replied. It's not something I take lightly, but it's part of the responsibility that comes with command. The room fell silent as the reality of my position sank in. These weren't theoretical military operations. They were real missions with real consequences, and I was the person making the final decisions. General, Admiral Peterson's voice came through the speaker, final authorization needed for Operation Nightfall. All assets are in position, and we have presidential approval for the mission. I looked around the room at my family, who were finally seeing the true scope of what their lonely failure had been doing with her life. Operation Nightfall is authorized. Execute immediately. As I coordinated the most complex hostage rescue operation in recent memory, my sister's future in-laws finally understood that their disappointing daughter-in-law-to-be had actually been carrying the weight of American lives on her shoulders, invisible and unrecognized, for years. 6 hours later, as the hostage rescue operation unfolded in real time, the call I'd been dreading came through. Colonel James Harrison, my former executive officer and current Pentagon liaison, appeared on my secure video link with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and utterly without the loyalty that had defined our working relationship for over 5 years. Rebecca, he said, his voice measured and formal, we need to discuss your handling of Operation Nightfall. Something in his tone immediately put me on alert. Harrison had been my most trusted advisor, the officer who'd helped me navigate the complex politics of flag rank leadership, who'd supported my promotion to general officer. He was supposed to be calling to coordinate support for the ongoing rescue operation, not to question my command decisions. Jim, what's wrong? I asked, studying his face through the screen. The operation is proceeding exactly as planned. JSOC reports successful infiltration and hostage location confirmed. That's exactly the problem, he replied, and I felt the temperature in the room drop. You've authorized a unilateral military operation without proper consultation with the Joint Chiefs. You've deployed special operations assets based on incomplete intelligence. You've risked an international incident without State Department approval. I stared at him in disbelief. Jim, we had American hostages in imminent danger. The intelligence was solid, and we had presidential authorization. This is exactly what operational commanders are supposed to do. Is it? He leaned forward, his expression hardening. Or did you see an opportunity to cement your legacy as a combat general by launching a high-profile rescue operation that could have been handled through diplomatic channels? The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a colleague expressing operational concerns. This was a calculated attack on my judgment and my motivations for authorizing the mission. What are you really saying, Jim? Harrison pulled out a tablet and began reading from what appeared to be an official document. I'm saying that several Pentagon officials have expressed concerns about your decision-making since your promotion to general officer. The rushed operational timelines, the cowboy mentality, the tendency to choose military solutions over diplomatic alternatives. Operation Nightfall might be the culmination of a pattern of concerning command choices. My blood went cold. I recognized the language. It was the same terminology used when flag officers were being prepared for relief of command. Someone had been building a case against my leadership, documenting every decision, every moment of operational assertiveness. "Jim, you know that's not true. You know my record better than anyone." "Do I?" he asked, and his voice carried a tone I'd never heard before. "When was the last time you consulted with the full Joint Chiefs before making a major operational decision? When was the last time you seemed concerned about the political implications of military action, instead of just the tactical objectives?" The betrayal cut deeper than any professional criticism could have. This man had been like a brother to me, had celebrated my promotion to general officer, had understood the weight of command responsibility. Now he was weaponizing my decisive leadership against me. "I've been doing my job," I said firmly, "and my job requires making life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure with incomplete information. Your job also requires building consensus and maintaining military diplomatic balance." Operation Nightfall demonstrates a concerning pattern of unilateral decision-making that puts you at odds with joint operational doctrine. I realized with growing horror that this wasn't a conversation about tonight's rescue operation. This was a carefully orchestrated intervention designed to question my fitness for command. Someone had been preparing for this moment, documenting my leadership style, building a case that my combat-oriented approach to crisis management was actually reckless militarism. "Jim, who initiated this evaluation?" He hesitated for just a moment, and in that pause I saw the truth. This wasn't his idea. Someone had convinced him to have this conversation, to plant seeds of doubt about my command philosophy at the moment when I most needed institutional support. "The Secretary of Defense is concerned," he said finally. "There's been discussion about whether the responsibilities of general officer rank have become too much for someone with your background." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Operation Nightfall hadn't just exposed my identity to my family. It had also provided the perfect opportunity for someone who wanted me removed to question every aspect of my military leadership. The next morning, I woke up to find my military career under systematic assault. The Washington Times headline read, "General's Judgment Questioned During Yemen Hostage Crisis." The article, clearly sourced from inside the Pentagon, painted a picture of a reckless commander who had rushed into a dangerous operation without proper authorization and diplomatic consideration. The story detailed my pattern of aggressive decision-making since becoming a general officer, citing anonymous sources who described me as increasingly isolated from Pentagon leadership and dismissive of interagency coordination. It mentioned my tendency toward unilateral military action and my failure to consider diplomatic alternatives before authorizing force. Every aspect of my decisive leadership was being reframed as evidence of reckless militarism. My quick responses to hostage situations became cowboy mentality that endangers American lives. My streamlined command decisions became bypassing established protocols. My willingness to authorize high-risk operations became, quote, grandstanding that prioritizes personal glory over strategic thinking. Admiral Peterson called within minutes of the story breaking. "Rebecca, this is a coordinated leak campaign. Someone's been feeding information to the press for weeks, building a narrative that you're unfit for general officer rank." "Who?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "It has to be coming from inside the Pentagon." The details about our operational discussions, your command decisions, your approach to crisis management, this is information that only senior staff would have access to. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Just as Operation Nightfall was being hailed as a successful rescue, with all 4 hostages recovered alive, someone was systematically undermining my credibility and military reputation. The hostage crisis hadn't just exposed my identity to my family. It had provided the perfect cover for a professional assassination. By noon, 3 more articles had appeared in major publications, all carrying the same theme. General Rebecca Thompson was a brilliant tactical officer who had overstepped her authority as a strategic commander. The stories painted me as a tragic figure who had confused battlefield leadership with Pentagon-level decision-making. Senator Robert Hayes, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, issued a statement calling for, quote, careful examination of my command decisions during the Yemen operation. "The American people deserve military leadership that's both decisive and collaborative," he told reporters. General Thompson's approach to this crisis raises questions about her understanding of modern military diplomatic balance. The most devastating blow came when Colonel Harrison held an impromptu press conference outside the Pentagon. Standing in his dress uniform, he expressed, quote, concerns about the decision-making process during Operation Nightfall. While I have tremendous respect for General Thompson's combat record, he said, I believe the Pentagon would benefit from more deliberative approaches to crisis management. His carefully worded statement was presented as evidence that even my closest advisors had lost confidence in my command philosophy. The narrative was becoming self-fulfilling. As more Pentagon officials distanced themselves from my approach, others felt safer joining the chorus of criticism. Katie called me that afternoon, her voice shaking with anger. Becca, I'm watching the news and I can't believe what they're saying about you. David told me that Operation Nightfall was exactly the kind of leadership that Marines respect, decisive action that saves lives. The truth doesn't matter right now, I told her. Someone wants me removed from command, and they're using every tool at their disposal to make it happen. But why? You brought those hostages home alive. You're a war hero. I thought about that question as I watched my reputation being dismantled in real time. Why indeed? Operation Nightfall had been a textbook success. Rapid deployment, precise execution, 0 casualties, mission accomplished. My leadership had been exactly what crisis situations required. The answer was becoming clear. Someone didn't want a general officer who was willing to take decisive military action without extensive political consultation. They wanted someone more controllable, more willing to consider bureaucratic approval over operational necessity. My independence, the very quality that made me effective during military crises, had also made me a target. In a Pentagon increasingly focused on political optics over military effectiveness, a general who prioritized mission success above all else was seen as a liability. As I prepared for what I knew would be the fight of my military career, I realized that the real battle wasn't about command authority or operational doctrine. It was about whether warrior leadership could survive in an increasingly politicized military establishment. The Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room was packed to capacity, with military personnel, defense contractors, and media representatives filling every available seat. I sat at the witness table in my dress blue uniform, facing a semicircle of senators who held my military career in their hands. Behind me, in the public gallery, I could see my family, Katie, David, even the Martinez family, sitting in the front row with expressions of fierce determination. Senator Hayes opened the hearing with his characteristic gravitas. General Thompson, this committee has received concerning reports about your command decisions during Operation Nightfall. We're here today to examine whether your leadership during this crisis reflects the judgment we expect from flag officers. I had prepared for this moment for weeks, gathering evidence, documenting every decision, building a case not just for my competence, but for the principle that military commanders must be able to act decisively when American lives hang in the balance. Senator Hayes, I began, my voice carrying the authority earned through years of combat command. I welcome this opportunity to present the facts about Operation Nightfall and to address the systematic campaign that has been waged against decisive military leadership. I activated the presentation screen behind me, displaying a timeline of the hostage crisis response. At 18:47 hours on the evening in question, Central Command received intelligence that 4 American civilians had been captured by a terrorist organization in Yemen. By 2030 hours, we had confirmed their location and assessed that they would be moved beyond rescue capability within 18 hours. Senator Patricia Williams, a former Navy officer, leaned forward. General Thompson, can you walk us through your decision-making process for authorizing immediate deployment of Special Operations Forces? Absolutely. I clicked through slides showing intelligence reports, risk assessments, and operational planning. Emergency deployment protocols require 3 criteria: confirmed American hostages, actionable intelligence, and time-sensitive extraction window. Operation Nightfall met all 3 criteria within the first 90 minutes. But General Thompson, Senator Hayes interrupted, you authorized this operation without extensive consultation with the State Department or consideration of diplomatic alternatives. I turned to face him directly. Senator, with respect, diplomatic negotiations don't work when terrorists are threatening to execute hostages within 48 hours. My job is to bring Americans home alive, not to conduct foreign policy seminars while they're being tortured. The room fell silent. I could see several senators shifting uncomfortably as the weight of my words settled in. Furthermore, I continued, the suggestion that I acted without proper authorization is categorically false. I had direct presidential approval, Joint Chiefs coordination, and full intelligence support. What I didn't have was the luxury of endless committee meetings while American lives hung in the balance. Senator Maria Rodriguez, a former federal prosecutor, spoke next. General, we've heard testimony suggesting that your command style has become increasingly isolated and unilateral. How do you respond to these characterizations? I had been waiting for this question. Senator, I'd like to address that directly by sharing some context about modern military command that I believe has been misrepresented. I displayed a new slide showing Operation Nightfall's timeline. This rescue operation was planned, authorized, and executed in under 12 hours. During that time, I coordinated with 17 different agencies, 4 foreign governments, and 32 individual commanders. That's not isolation. That's integration under extreme pressure. The room was completely quiet now, all attention focused on my testimony. The unilateral decision-making, my critics describe, is actually the decisive leadership required when American lives are at stake. When I miss family dinners, it's because I'm coordinating with special operations commanders in active combat zones. When I seem disconnected from Pentagon social functions, it's because I'm processing classified intelligence about threats to American citizens. I clicked to my final slide, showing the successful outcome of Operation Nightfall. This operation resulted in 4 Americans returned home alive, 0 friendly casualties, and 0 civilian casualties. If that's the result of reckless leadership, then I'm proud to be reckless. David was sitting in the gallery with tears in his eyes, finally understanding the full weight of what his future sister-in-law had been carrying. The question before this committee, I concluded, is not whether I'm the most politically convenient general in Washington. The question is whether you want military leaders who make decisions based on operational necessity and the safety of American lives, or commanders who prioritize bureaucratic approval over bringing our people home. The silence that followed was deafening. The committee deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they reconvened, the chamber was even more packed than before, with military personnel, defense officials, and media representatives filling every available seat. The committee's decision would either vindicate my command philosophy or end my military career in disgrace. Senator Williams spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of both a former naval officer and a legislator. General Thompson, after reviewing the evidence and testimony, this committee finds that your command decisions during Operation Nightfall were not only appropriate but exemplary. You demonstrated exactly the kind of decisive leadership that protects American lives. The reaction was immediate and thunderous. Despite the formal setting, applause erupted from the gallery, led by the Marines and military personnel who had packed the hearing room. I could see my family in the front row, tears streaming down their faces as they finally understood the full magnitude of what their sister and daughter had accomplished. Senator Hayes looked visibly uncomfortable as Senator Williams continued. Furthermore, we are deeply troubled by the apparent coordinated effort to undermine your leadership during a successful hostage rescue operation. Such actions put politics above national security and cannot be tolerated. But the real vindication came in the hours that followed. Within minutes of the committee's announcement, military leaders across the country began issuing statements of support. General Michael Patterson, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, appeared on CNN, calling my leadership the gold standard for crisis command. Admiral Peterson, who had supported me throughout the ordeal, released a statement that evening. General Thompson demonstrated exactly the kind of warrior leadership our founding fathers envisioned when they created civilian oversight of the military. She prioritized mission success over bureaucratic comfort, and America is safer for it. The truth about the internal campaign against me began to emerge within hours. An investigation by the Pentagon Inspector General revealed that Colonel Harrison had been coordinating with defense contractors who wanted more politically compliant general officers. The same companies that had opposed my promotion to flag rank had been funding a sophisticated campaign to undermine combat-focused leadership. Admiral Peterson called with the news I'd been waiting for. "Rebecca, Harrison just submitted his resignation effective immediately. And the Pentagon officials who questioned your leadership? They've all issued public statements acknowledging that your command decisions were operationally sound and strategically correct. The vindication was swift and complete. Editorial boards across the political spectrum condemned the attempt to politicize military command during active operations. The president, despite the political risks, issued a statement praising my, quote, unwavering commitment to bringing Americans home safely, regardless of bureaucratic pressure. My family gathered that evening at the Martinez home for what Katie called a proper celebration of military leadership. This time, there were no awkward comments about my single status or career choices. Maria Martinez, humbled and apologetic, raised her glass first. To General Thompson, she said, her voice thick with emotion and newfound respect. I spent years thinking you were missing out on life's important things, when you were actually protecting the most important thing of all, our freedom and our family's safety. David stood next, his military bearing evident, even in civilian clothes. Ma'am, I've served under a lot of officers, but what you did during Operation Nightfall is what every Marine hopes to see in command. You brought our people home. Katie was the last to speak, her voice breaking with pride. Becca, you've been my hero this whole time, even when I was too blind to see it. Thank you for showing me what real sacrifice looks like. But perhaps the most meaningful vindication came from an unexpected source. The next morning I received a letter from the mother of one of the rescued hostages. General Thompson, she wrote, I don't know how to thank you for bringing my daughter home. You risked your career to save her life, and our family will never forget that. For the first time in my military career, I didn't have to choose between family acceptance and operational duty. My family finally understood that their lonely failure had actually been serving as a guardian of American lives, carrying the weight of life or death decisions on her shoulders, while they worried about her lack of traditional success. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, addressing a packed auditorium of military officers, defense officials, and cadets from service academies across the country. The occasion was the launch of the new Combat Leadership Institute, designed to train the next generation of military commanders in decisive action during national crises. In the front row sat Katie and David, now married and beaming with pride as David prepared to ship out for officer candidate school. Behind them, the Martinez family sat with expressions of wonder and respect, finally understanding the scope of the work their daughter-in-law's sister had been doing in silence for years. Operation Nightfall taught us that military leadership requires more than tactical expertise, I began, my voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium. It requires the moral courage to act when American lives hang in the balance, the wisdom to distinguish between military necessity and political convenience, and the resilience to continue serving even when that service is misunderstood or criticized. The audience included several faces I recognized from my darkest days. Former critics who had publicly apologized once the truth about the campaign against me became clear. The defense contractor's involvement had been exposed in a series of congressional hearings that led to new ethics rules for military-industrial relationships. Admiral Peterson took the podium next, his voice carrying the respect of someone who had witnessed military history firsthand. General Thompson didn't just command a successful hostage rescue operation, he said. She demonstrated that the American military can still produce leaders who put mission success above personal comfort, who choose operational effectiveness over bureaucratic approval. After the ceremony, my family joined me for dinner at a restaurant near Arlington National Cemetery. The conversation was natural, comfortable. No more awkward silences or disappointed looks about my single status. They asked detailed questions about military leadership, genuinely interested in understanding the complexities of modern warfare and crisis management. Rebecca, Roberto Martinez said, reaching across the table to shake my hand. I need to say something. For years, I measured success by the wrong standards. I thought achievement meant having a family, making money, living a comfortable life. I never understood that some people are called to serve something bigger than themselves. Maria nodded emphatically. When I worried about you being alone, I didn't understand that you were never alone. You had thousands of Marines depending on you, American families trusting you to bring their loved ones home safely. Katie was glowing with pride. Becca, David starts OCS next month, and he says he wants to be the kind of officer who leads like you do. He wants to earn the right to serve under commanders who put mission first. As we walked back to our cars, David linked his arm with mine in a gesture that felt both familial and respectful. "Ma'am, I hope you know that night at the engagement party changed everything for me. Seeing you coordinate that rescue operation while our families watched, it showed me what real leadership looks like. The work continues, as it always will. There are new threats emerging, new crises requiring swift military response, new hostage situations that will test everything I've learned about command under fire. But now I face these challenges with something I hadn't had for years: the unqualified support of a family who finally understands that being alone doesn't mean being lonely. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from standing guard over principles that others take for granted, protecting American lives from those who would harm them. Sometimes being misunderstood is the price of doing what's right. And sometimes, when the truth finally emerges, it illuminates not just your own worth, but the value of every person who chooses duty over recognition, service over comfort, and mission success over personal convenience. The Marines I command understand this. They know that someone has to stand ready to act when diplomacy fails, when American lives hang in the balance, when the only thing standing between hostages and their executioners is the willingness to risk everything for people you'll never meet. That's what it means to serve. That's what it means to be a Marine. And that's what it means to choose duty over everything else, even when no one understands, even when no one is watching, even when the cost is being called a failure by those who matter most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.